When I opened the door and saw them standing there, smiling as if nothing had ever happened, something inside me snapped. It was a warm Saturday morning, sunlight spilling across my marble floors and the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the air. I had just settled into my favorite armchair by the window, my laptop open, a quiet playlist humming softly in the background. Life, for the first time in years, felt balanced. My mornings were calm, punctuated by small routines that grounded me, the ritual of grinding my own coffee beans, the soft creak of the leather chair as I stretched, the gentle buzz of the city outside. And then the doorbell rang. I frowned. Visitors were rare. Very rare. I hadn't invited anyone over in months. My life had shrunk into these predictable rhythms, and I liked it that way. The first sound of their laughter, the unmistakable, too loud, familiar laughter, made my stomach twist. My family. The very same relatives who hadn't acknowledged my birthdays, anniversaries, or even simple messages for 12 long years. They were standing on my doorstep, perfectly dressed, looking as if they'd stepped out of a magazine. "Hello, darling." My cousin's voice rang, high-pitched and warm, exactly the same as it had been when we were teenagers. "We thought we'd finally pay a visit." I froze, gripping the doorframe. 12 years. 12 years of silence, of carefully avoiding their calls, of quietly building a life without them. And now, just like that, they had arrived. Their presence filled the doorway, but it wasn't just their physical presence, it was the weight of every slight, every snub, every ignored invitation. I felt the pulse in my neck, a strange mixture of anger, disbelief, and a twinge of sadness. Come in?" I managed, my voice softer than I intended. My own house suddenly felt too small, too familiar, too intimate for this confrontation. Inside, they moved with ease, like they belonged here, in my living room, my kitchen, my life. I watched my uncle settle onto the sofa, the same one I had agonized over picking out, and my aunt reached for the fruit bowl I had spent an hour arranging that morning. Their hands lingered over the fruit, almost caressing it, and I realized with a jolt how much of me they had ignored for all these years. "How have you been?" they asked in unison, voices sweet and rehearsed. I smiled tightly. "Good. Busy. You know how it is." My mind raced, trying to find a place between politeness and the growing anger I felt. I wanted to ask them why, after 12 years, they suddenly thought to show up. I wanted to scream at them for every holiday, every birthday, every dinner I'd been absent from because they never even considered me. But my voice caught somewhere between my throat and my ribcage. I didn't trust myself to speak without shattering the fragile calm I had built. For a moment, we sat in a strained silence. The sunlight bounced off the polished surfaces of my home, reflecting the stark contrast between their sudden familiarity and my hard-won independence. My mind wandered to the past, the birthday parties where I had watched them post pictures on social media without a single word from them. The weddings, the graduations, the family gatherings I had been deliberately left out of. And yet here they were, smiling, laughing, and sipping my expensive coffee as if 12 years of neglect could simply be erased with a cup and a smile. I glanced at my husband, who had been quietly observing from the kitchen. His hand found mine, a grounding presence in the storm of emotions threatening to break free. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His eyes conveyed the same question I was silently asking myself, why now? And as I poured another cup of coffee, I realized something frightening. I didn't just want answers. I wanted to understand the reason behind this sudden appearance, and I knew, deep down, that whatever truth lay ahead might hurt more than I was ready to bear. Because 12 years of absence isn't something you forgive with a cup of coffee. The days before that morning had been ordinary, almost painfully so. My life had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt both comforting and earned. I woke early, brewed my coffee, and watched the sunrise from the terrace while the city yawned awake below. My husband and I would share a slow breakfast, the kind where we lingered over each sip of tea, our conversation drifting from our work to the mundane details of life. The kids were older now, teenagers mostly absorbed in their screens and music, but they still brought warmth to the mornings, their laughter echoing down the hall like tiny reminders that life was ours, independent and complete. I had worked hard to build this life, brick by brick. The home I now lived in, with its wide windows, warm wood tones, and soft light spilling over carefully curated furniture, wasn't just a space, it was a symbol. A symbol that I could thrive, that I could be happy, even when family ties had frayed. And yet, as I watched my relatives navigate my home that morning, I felt a pang of something I hadn't anticipated. Vulnerability. That, after years of exclusion, the walls I had built around my heart and my home could still be crossed by the people who had ignored me. Over the next few hours, they wandered through my home, commenting on the art I had collected, the furniture I had chosen, even the kitchen appliances. "Oh, this espresso machine is divine," my aunt exclaimed, running her fingers over the polished metal. "I can't believe you didn't invite us sooner." I smiled, a tight, careful smile. "Well, life gets busy, you know?" They nodded enthusiastically, oblivious to the weight of the years they had missed. I caught myself watching them, noticing the way they moved as if they owned every corner, every surface. And though I tried to stay calm, a quiet storm was brewing inside me. After they had settled into the living room with drinks in hand, I retreated to the kitchen to start preparing lunch. The clatter of dishes and the hum of the oven were grounding, familiar, almost comforting. I had spent years perfecting my recipes, learning to coax flavors out of simple ingredients, and today was no different, except now, my cooking felt like a subtle act of assertion. I would feed them, entertain them, but on my terms. My husband stayed close, sensing the tension that curled around my chest. "Do you want me to handle this?" he asked gently, his voice a quiet anchor. "No," I said, trying to steady myself. "I need to see this through, at least for now." Lunch was awkward but polite. Conversation floated over the table in rehearsed, safe topics, the weather, trivial updates about distant relatives, and questions about work. Every compliment they gave about my home felt like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was validation, on the other, it was a reminder of all the times they had ignored my accomplishments, my efforts, my life. After lunch, they began asking about my children. I answered carefully, sensing the curiosity veiled behind the smiles. "Emma just started her new school term," I said. "And Jacob has been working on a robotics project." "Oh, we'd love to see them," my cousin piped up. I hesitated. I wanted to protect them from the sudden intrusion of people who had been absent for more than a decade. But I also knew that my children had a right to meet their extended family, even if the timing and motives were questionable. "They're upstairs, finishing their homework." "Maybe later," I said. The rest of the afternoon passed in a delicate dance of smiles, polite laughter, and subtle tension. My relatives were charming, articulate, the kind of people who could slip effortlessly into any social setting. But beneath the surface, I felt their absence like a shadow, a silent accusation that hovered over the conversations. Every question they asked, every anecdote they shared, carried an unspoken message: we're here now. Forget the past. By evening, I was exhausted. Not physically, the body can endure much, but emotionally, mentally. I had kept my composure, but inside, the questions gnawed at me. Why now? Why after 12 years of silence? What had changed that suddenly made my presence, my home, and my life interesting enough to invade? And then, just as I began to think I could ignore the questions for a little longer, I noticed something strange. My uncle had left his phone carelessly on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a series of messages, one of which I couldn't help but glance at. My heart skipped a beat. Something about the messages didn't sit right. The language was too calculated, the tone too casual for a family just reconnecting after so many years. I pushed the thought away. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was normal to check messages during a visit. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and I knew, deep down, that the days ahead would reveal whether this visit was truly about reconciliation, or something far more complicated. The first clue came later that evening. after my relatives had lingered long past the time most guests would have left. We had moved to the sitting room, soft light from the lamps casting a warm glow across the polished wood floors. My husband had disappeared into the study with a book, leaving me alone with them, and that's when I noticed the subtle shift, the kind that starts as a whisper in your gut before it grows into a steady, nagging pulse of unease. They were laughing together, a little too much, at stories I barely recognized. My cousin leaned toward my uncle in a way that suggested inside knowledge, a shared secret I wasn't privy to. Their eyes met across the room, and there was that flicker, that subtle, fleeting glance that carried meaning without words. I tried to brush it off as imagination. Perhaps I was reading too much into things. 12 years of absence had left me cautious, sensitive to the slightest hint of disrespect. "Do you remember when we used to come here for the holidays?" my aunt asked suddenly, her voice saccharine, almost too polished. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, I remember." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and I realized it wasn't nostalgia she was after. It was a performance, a carefully rehearsed act meant to soothe, to convince me, and perhaps themselves, that the past could be neatly smoothed over. As the night went on, small things began to unsettle me. A casual remark about my investments, a fleeting comment about my children's future schools, questions about my home that felt intrusive rather than curious. Every compliment had an edge, every smile a hidden agenda. My senses sharpened, as if my body had remembered the years of exclusion and betrayal. I began observing them, taking note of their gestures, their tone, their choice of words. When my husband returned, he noticed my unease immediately. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, sitting beside me. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. "It's small things. Just the way they move, the way they talk. It doesn't feel right." He nodded slowly. "Trust your instincts." Later that night, after they had retired to the guest rooms I had reluctantly prepared, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, tracing my steps along the familiar paths, letting my hands brush against the smooth surfaces, seeking comfort in the tactile certainty of my home. But even here, in the sanctuary I had built, I felt the intrusion of something foreign. And then I saw it, a small detail that almost made me laugh, if it weren't so disturbing. My uncle had left his wallet on the kitchen counter, open just enough for me to glimpse a receipt tucked inside. The date was today, and the address printed on it was for a nearby real estate office. My heart stuttered. Why would my uncle, who had no business in property matters, be at a real estate office the same day they arrived at my house? I told myself to ignore it. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps I was being paranoid. 12 years of absence had left me sensitive, yes, but not irrational. Yet the seed of doubt had taken root, and sleep was no longer possible. I paced the floors, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, the faint creak of my own floorboards, the soft whir of the air conditioning. Every sound seemed magnified, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the revelation that I feared was coming. The next morning, the tension escalated. Over breakfast, I noticed my cousin's phone buzzing constantly, messages appearing and disappearing with a rapid rhythm. He would glance at it, smirk, and quickly put it away whenever I looked. I caught a fragment of a message as he unlocked it briefly. "Everything is set. Today's the day." My stomach turned. That phrase lingered in my mind, repeating like a drumbeat against the walls of reason. What was set? What day? I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but I hesitated. I needed proof, something tangible, undeniable, before I could face the storm that was surely approaching. Throughout that morning, I kept up appearances, smiling, serving coffee, answering questions about my life with careful neutrality. But inside, a quiet fury was building. 12 years of absence couldn't simply be excused with a visit. And if there was a hidden motive behind their sudden interest in my life, I knew I had to uncover it, not just for myself, but for my children, for my husband, and for the years I had spent quietly building a life they had ignored. By midday, I realized one thing with chilling clarity: this visit was not about reconciliation. It was about something else entirely, something they had planned long before stepping across my doorstep. It was late that afternoon when the betrayal finally revealed itself, and I remember the exact moment, the way the sunlight fell across the living room, the scent of my fresh-baked bread lingering in the air, the subtle creak of the floor beneath my feet as I approached the coffee table. My uncle had carelessly left his briefcase open while answering a call in the guest room. Curiosity and suspicion gnawed at me, a force I could no longer resist. I knelt beside the briefcase, flipping through papers with trembling hands. Receipts, contracts, documents with my name printed on them in bold letters, all signed. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was looking at: legal documents showing my house was being transferred, sold, or mortgaged. My heart pounded, a mix of disbelief and rising panic. 12 years of absence, all of it leading up to this moment, a calculated intrusion to stake a claim on my life. I remember the silence that followed. My hand hovered over a document, the glossy ink burning into my mind. My children's laughter upstairs, oblivious, became a distant echo, almost unreal. And then the sharp click of the guest room door startled me. My uncle and cousin were standing there, expressions carefully neutral, as if they hadn't expected me to discover their plans. "I see you found it," my uncle said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made my blood run cold. What are you doing?" My voice shook, a fragile veneer over the storm inside me. "It's simple," my cousin added, stepping forward. "You've done well for yourself, yes. But we thought it was time to help you manage things. Consider it family guidance." "Family guidance?" I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. "After 12 years of ignoring me, you show up and call this guidance?" My aunt interjected, her tone honeyed but firm. "We only want what's best for you. You've worked so hard, and, well, you could use our expertise." I stared at them, feeling a mix of fury and incredulity. Every smile they had offered over the past day now seemed like a mask, a tool to conceal the greed and deception beneath. My hands shook as I held up the documents. "This is theft. This is fraud. 12 years of absence, and now this is your plan?" My uncle's gaze flickered, the first crack in his carefully constructed calm. We just want to help you secure your future. You'll thank us later." I felt a rush of something primal, protective, righteous anger. My children's futures, my home, my life, everything I had built, was under threat. I had worked for years to ensure stability, to create a sanctuary that wasn't defined by their whims or neglect. And now, they were trying to claim it as if absence had granted them entitlement. "You've chosen to be absent," I said, my voice steadying, gaining power with each word. "You ignored birthdays, weddings, anniversaries. You ignored my messages, my calls, my life. And now you think that gives you the right to this?" I gestured at the documents. "I won't let you. Not now. Not ever." The room was heavy with tension. My uncle's lips pressed into a thin line, my cousin's posture stiffened, and my aunt's eyes flicked between us, searching for a way to salvage the facade. But the truth was undeniable. Their plan, meticulously hidden behind charm and smiles, had been exposed. My husband appeared at the doorway, silent but resolute. His presence was a shield, grounding me as I felt the enormity of the betrayal. "You need to leave," he said, voice calm but firm. "Now." My relatives exchanged glances, the first real uncertainty flashing across their faces. The mask of ease had slipped. For a moment, they seemed smaller, diminished by the strength and clarity of our resolve. I gathered the documents, stacking them carefully. "I'll be contacting my lawyer," I said. "Every signature, every transaction will be scrutinized. You won't get what you want. You never did. And frankly, I wish you'd never come here." The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. For the first time that day, I saw hesitation, a crack in their perfect composure. They knew they had miscalculated, that the years of absence had not left me powerless, that my independence was not a weakness to be exploited. As they filed out, muttering excuses and false promises of family reconciliation, I felt a wave of emotions: relief, anger, exhaustion, but also an undeniable sense of triumph. They had underestimated me. They had assumed absence equaled submission. But life, as I had learned, was not so simple. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting the reality sink in. 12 years of absence, and yet, through patience, resilience, and self-respect, I had protected my home, my family, and my dignity. The betrayal was painful, but the lesson was clear: absence may wound, but strength and integrity endure far longer. The days that followed were a careful dance between caution and strategy. My relatives had left, but their shadow lingered, like a stubborn stain I couldn't immediately scrub away. Every time I walked past the coffee table or glanced at the front door, I saw their faces, their smug certainty, and it fueled something inside me, a determination not just to defend what was mine, but to ensure that their intentions were fully exposed to everyone who mattered. I began by reviewing the documents in meticulous detail. Each signature, each clause, each small note in the margins, I traced them all, cross-referencing with my own records. The more I examined, the clearer it became: this had been planned long before their arrival. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment scheme, it was calculated, cold, and deliberate. My stomach turned as I realized just how close they had come to taking everything I had worked for. I decided I needed information. I called the real estate office listed on the receipt, posing as a potential client who wanted to verify the transaction. My voice was calm, polite, professional, nothing like the storm I felt inside. The receptionist confirmed my fears: someone had indeed tried to file documents in my name, but the process had been halted because the signatures didn't match the official records. My heart raced. I had caught them just in time. Next, I reached out to my lawyer, explaining the situation carefully. She listened, her expression tightening as I outlined the 12-year absence and the sudden intrusion. "This is serious," she said. "They've tried to commit fraud, and there's enough here to take legal action immediately. You did the right thing by noticing the inconsistencies." Her words were both reassuring and chilling. They had underestimated me, yes, but the lengths they were willing to go to exploit my absence were frightening. I felt a mix of fear, anger, and a strange exhilaration, the realization that I could turn the tables, that I could confront not only their deceit but their arrogance. I decided on a course of action that was deliberate, controlled, and measured. I wouldn't lash out. I wouldn't allow anger to dictate my response. Instead, I would gather proof, document every interaction, and ensure that when the time came, the truth would be undeniable. I began keeping a detailed journal of the visit, recording every conversation, every gesture, every suspicious behavior. I took photographs of the documents, screenshots of their messages, and notes on their phone activity when it had briefly come into view. Meanwhile, I maintained appearances. When they called later that week, attempting to sound casual and innocuous, I was polite but detached. "I'm glad you enjoyed your visit," I said evenly, "but we'll handle things from here." I didn't give them an inch, and I didn't reveal the depth of my awareness. I wanted them to feel the pressure subtly, the quiet weight of scrutiny pressing down without my ever raising my voice. I also had to protect my family. I spoke to my children carefully, explaining that sometimes people make choices that hurt, but that we would always protect our home and our life together. Their eyes, wide with both confusion and trust, reminded me why I needed to remain calm, why I couldn't let emotion override reason. One afternoon, I received a subtle but telling message from a mutual acquaintance of my relatives, someone who had witnessed their recent activity and could confirm that the plan had extended beyond mere conversation. They had intended to involve others, to quietly pressure me into compliance through fear and manipulation. That was the final confirmation I needed. This was not a family visit, this was an orchestrated attempt at control. With all the evidence compiled and a clear plan forming in my mind, I confronted my uncle and cousin directly via phone. My voice was steady, measured, and firm. I know what you tried to do. I have the evidence. The signatures, the receipts, the messages, everything. This ends now. You either come forward voluntarily or I will pursue legal action. There's no negotiation here. The silence on the other end was telling. I could hear them breathing, unsure, calculating. I continued, you underestimated me. You assumed absence equaled weakness. You were wrong. Completely wrong. I am not only protecting my home, I am protecting my family and our future. Don't make this worse for yourselves. It was a gamble, one that required patience, courage, and discipline. But I had learned over the years that true power lay not in anger, but in clarity and preparation. I ended the call calmly, placing the phone down, feeling the tension slowly ease as I realized I was finally taking action, not impulsively, but intelligently, strategically, and decisively. The consequence of exposing their scheme didn't take long to ripple through the circles we shared. Within days, word reached other family members, distant relatives, and mutual acquaintances. I had kept a careful record of every interaction, every message, every suspicious movement, and now, for the first time, I was ready to let the world see the truth. I started subtly, sharing the facts with trusted friends and neighbors who had known the family for years. They tried to transfer my property, I explained quietly, handing over copies of the documents and receipts. The disbelief on their faces was immediate. I could see the shock, the same incredulity I had felt when I discovered the betrayal. But there was also validation. For the first time, I wasn't alone in witnessing the manipulation. By the end of the week, the news had spread further. A cousin I had once been close to reached out, hesitant, voice shaking with a mix of concern and regret. I had no idea they were planning this, she said. You're right to protect yourself. I just wish we'd known sooner. The more I shared, the clearer it became. My relatives' carefully cultivated image of charm and goodwill was unraveling. What had been a polished facade of familial warmth now looked opportunistic, greedy, and calculated. People who had admired their social grace now saw the cracks, the true nature behind the smiles and the casual politeness. I was contacted by the real estate office again, this time with confirmation that the attempted transactions had been fully voided. The signatures had been flagged as fraudulent, the accounts frozen. They were no longer able to move forward with any part of their plan, and the legal team assured me that should they attempt anything further, immediate action would be taken. Even more surprisingly, some of my extended family, who had remained silent for years, began reaching out to offer support. Calls, messages, and even a few visits from those I hadn't heard from in over a decade, all expressing shock and admiration for the way I had handled the situation. It was a strange feeling, to see that moral truth and patience could outlast deception and greed. Meanwhile, my uncle and cousin began to face subtle social consequences. Mutual friends who had previously been charmed by their presence now looked at them with wary eyes. Invitations they had once received evaporated, and questions about their integrity began surfacing in conversations I would hear secondhand. Their reputation, long polished by charm and selective appearances, started to crumble under the weight of exposed truth. I never gloated. I never called attention to my triumph. I remained calm, polite, and grounded, letting the evidence speak for itself. Every interaction, every casual mention of the events, reinforced the reality: their deception had failed. The community, friends, and family now knew that manipulation has a limit, and that integrity and vigilance endure longer than schemes born of entitlement. And yet, as the days passed, I realized something profound. The public consequence, the social exposure, the legal closure, was only part of the story. The most meaningful part was the quiet reassurance I felt within my own home, the sense that I had acted with dignity, that I had protected my family, and that the betrayal, no matter how painful, had been met with intelligence and composure rather than blind fury. By the end of the month, life began to settle again. The house, once infiltrated by their presence, now felt solid and secure. My children laughed freely, unaware of the storm that had briefly touched our lives. My husband and I moved through our routines with a deeper sense of calm, a recognition that we had weathered a challenge that could have broken us, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than before.